Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Decryption and I hope you are well. What is Common UI in Unreal? You've probably seen it on a bunch of latest tutorial streams. Everybody talks about Common UI, but what is it? It's been around since early UE5 and it really came to light in UE 5.6, but what is it? And we're going to have a look today. We're going to talk about what Common UI is, very basically how it works, how to use it, and we're going to go from there. So let's get started. So what is Common UI? Common UI is a new type of plugin to create more advanced user interfaces in Unreal, giving you full control over them with a bunch of extra features. So let's jump into the designer because we always like doing that. And let's talk about some rough issues Common UI solves. So let's imagine you have your controller here. Every time you press a button, that needs to tell your UI to do something, right? So it sends the buttons across and you have your UI here. So let's say this is my inventory and it's got two buttons on it for some reason. But you press a button here, so you press the X button, that sends it across to the UI here, and then we need to grab that button and tell it to do something. So before, without Common UI, and you'd have a few functions you could use to detect this, specifically the get key down, get key up, get preview key down. 3 different functions that do relatively the same thing, they give you which key is pressed. And then you can take this input, and you can say, if you've pressed the X button, then you can select button 1, right? So we'll just do a tick and a cross. So you can select the tick button, for example. That's how you used to have to do it. And for a while it worked okay, but you ran into some issues. What if the keyboard pressed a key? There's my shockingly bad keyboard. And they pressed the space key. You'd also have to, in these functions, say if X is pressed or the space key is pressed, and then depending if you're doing other platforms, or this, or this, or this, or this, and then route all of them to the correct one. So that's already a bit of a pain point. But it's usable, you can get around it. You can create some funky data table thing that detects the key and outputs it. That's all okay. But this is where Common UI comes into handy, because it does make all of that a lot easier. But there's one other point that it does make it a lot easier with, and that's if we click this tick button here, and we don't want it to just do something. We want it to actually open up a brand new pop-up window, just a smaller one, which says, "Are you sure?" And then it has another tick button, a tick and a cross, something super basic like that. So now we run into a massive issue, which again can be solved, but is a pain in the butt to do. And that's if we come across and we do the function to detect which key, and we say, yeah, we need to click the tick button, then we say open up this new widget, so it opens it. When we press X and space now, what happens? Well, both interfaces are actually going to trigger saying, hey, this key's been pressed, hey, this key's been pressed. So you now need to also keep track of which is the active widget and only send the input to that one. There are ways around it that you can disable a widget, you can just ignore it if it's not the active widget, but both widgets are going to be told there's a key pressed. So you now also need to keep track of which widget is active, which is another thing you need to solve. And the third pain point I'm going to mention, so we've got the tracking of the buttons which have been pressed. We've also got the routing the input to the correct UI. The final point we've got is, let's say you have a tutorial pop-up at the top of your screen that says press, and then you want your specific key, so we do X on a controller to talk. That works okay if you're on a controller, but then what happens if you switch to a keyboard? Before, nothing would happen. It would still show press X to talk. And you see this in quite a lot of older games made in Unreal 4, where they've not really sorted the inputs out. So you have to kind of restart the game or go into the options and physically switch to another key. And then sometimes the UI doesn't update until it disappears and comes back anyway. So you have to physically handle which input is active to show the correct platform. And all of these issues Common UI solves for you, which is really, really nice. And depending how you build your Common UI, also depends whether it can update in real time. So how does CommonUI differ then? So before, where we had the controls which pass the input straight to the UI, CommonUI doesn't do that. Instead, CommonUI has something called an input router or input routing system. So what it does instead is any key you press comes to this routing system component. And that detects everything you need because you bundle your keys together. So you will say X and space do the same thing. And then this just sends one ping out. So you don't need to worry about if this key or this key or this key is pressed. It's all handled inside this input routing section, which we'll look at later. It's super simple. It's just a fancy data table. And then that sends it to the UI. So that's already solved one of the issues we have. And because it's using the input routing system, certain widgets built into it, such as a common action widget, are already built in using the input router. Which means if you change controls, this widget will automatically update to the new platform, which is something else we will also look at. But you use this to show an icon depending on what platform you're on. So you can say, based on the input router, show the interact key, and then you'll say for PC that's space, for Xbox and PlayStation it's X, and this widget will automatically update to the correct icon, which is very, very cool. But the biggest thing that I personally really like about CommonUI, apart from all this other cool stuff we're looking at, is how it handles UIs. Because before, remember, the input would just be passed to the UI and you'd have to detect which the active UI is. But with CommonUI, what it does is it uses a layered system approach. So you have something called a menu stack that you add to your UI. So this will be our menu stack. And this stack has layers of widgets inside of it. So what you do is your UI contains the menu stack when you're ready to launch it. And then instead of just creating the inventory widget, you instead say, hey, get my inventory widget and push it or put it inside of the menu stack. And it will basically do that. It will push it inside of it and store it inside it. And then all of your input routes to that inventory, just like normal. But then when you tick this button, you again don't call create widget to show the new one. Instead, you tell the menu stack to add or push the new widget to it, and it puts it on top of it, meaning all of the previous under layers don't get the input, only the topmost widget does, which is fantastic for input routing because all it does is push it into it. It also contains a bunch more easier things where you don't need to say if you press up, go here, if you press down, go here. It handles all of that for you to navigate around. You can also select specific buttons and say if the interact button or the accept button is pressed, automatically click it. This is why I love CommonUI. It's such a complex underdeep system, super easy to get up and running, and it's just fantastic to use because it solves so many problems. So let's have a look in Unreal now at how we go and set it up and start using it. Now, before we start actually setting it up, I'm just in a brand new third-person Unreal 5.6 template. Anything from 5.0 to 5.7 plus should be the same. The only difference is 5.3 onwards are the ones that supports enhanced input-based CommonUI. Anything below doesn't support it yet. But there's going to be three types of users. Those of you that are brand new to CommonUI, you don't have an existing setup, we can follow along, you're brand new, that's all good. You will have the users who want to set it up completely by themselves, which we aren't going to do today, but I'll explain why in a moment. And then you have the users who have an existing setup. So you will need to be careful to make sure you don't overwrite your existing CommonUI setup if you're using another plugin, for example. Now, the reason I say we're not going to go into it today is setting CommonUI up from scratch can take a few hours for you to get all the icons, to get all the platforms set up, to sort out your UI to make it all work. And personally, I've never done it because I've never needed to. There is a fantastic YouTube channel that I've always used and always recommended for anybody who wants to learn CommonUI. Oh, he says right there, Mr. Bootia. There you go. I always recommend this YouTube channel to people when they're learning CommonUI. It's where I learned how to use it. It's where so many other people have learned how to use CommonUI. And he does have guides to fully setting CommonUI up. However, The reason I'm not going to go through the install is because I personally use a plugin to do it. It's completely free, called Narrative CommonUI. You may have heard me talk about it before, you may have heard loads of people talk about it. You do not need to own any other narrative product in order to use CommonUI here. This is a standalone plugin, completely free. You download, install, and it sets your CommonUI install time to less than a few minutes. That's it. It's got everything built in for you. So this is why I'm going to use it. But the core concept of CommonUI is the same. So if you're wanting to go through and set up your own brand new CommonUI, you've got some reason, you just want the knowledge, follow any tutorials on Mr. Boutier's. He's great at it, honestly. If you're happy on using Narrative CommonUI with me, I'll show you how to quickly set it all up and talk about the settings. If you've got your own existing setup, I'll try to tell you when you can start following along, but chances are you've already got everything already. For those who are going to use Narrative CommonUI with me, because it's super easy, just download it and install it to your engine or your project. And you can see in my content drawer, I've already got it installed here. So let's get it set up in the project, because you can't just put it in and it starts working. We've got some things we have to tell it to do. So just come to Edit, Project Settings, and the first thing we're going to do is search for Viewport. And by default, it's Game Viewport Client. This is just the standard Unreal. We're going to switch this to Common Game Viewport Client. I've never seen or heard of an issue with you taking an existing game and moving it to CommonUI. I've never heard of any issues. The only issues I have heard about is where people switch it to CommonUI and they're trying to do all of their inputs using the old method mixed with CommonUI around the same input. So basically the entire system gets confused. Apart from that, I've never heard of an issue. So I'm just going to quickly restart that now. And we're back in the room. So, viewport has now been set, which is all good, and you'll be able to play it, nothing will change, it'll be all okay. Even if you have existing widgets, it should be all okay. And now we have access to this new Common Input Settings tab thing here. In here, this is how we tell CommonUI what to work with. Where does it get the data table I mentioned earlier of all the list of keys it can use, and which platforms do you want to support? Input data is your super basic inputs. Not interact and open inventory and everything like that. This is your super basic, what keys do you want to accept a prompt and what keys do you want to go back? So the narrative has one built in, so we'll just select that and open it up so we can take a quick look. And you'll see it really is super basic here. You've got what is your default click action or go forward accept, and we've just got this data table with generic accept selected. And equally, we've got a default back, because if you think of most UIs, you're going to have a go forward and you're going to have a go back. That's what those two are. There is this default hold data, which is something I've never used personally, but it's where you can press and hold a key to action something. If you've played No Man's Sky, pretty much all of their UIs are click and hold. It's really annoying, but it is in most cases. So if we come and open up this data table here, even though this is built into Narrative CommonUI, you will end up creating one of these, or if you have your own existing one, you will have one. And this is the grand list of every single type of option you might want. In this case, it's all built in. In this case, it's got a bunch of ones that you may or may not want. You can delete them, you can add your own. We probably will end up adding our own later. But you can see we've got generic accept, generic back, we've even got a generic forward. And if we just select, say, the generic accept in the row editor, we have a bunch of properties in here that we set. So the display name is if you show this key and you get the text for it, what does it show? And you can see, like, if I come down to, say, skip dialog line, it's called skip. So if we were to use that one, it would just show skip or interact or favorite item or next previous page, etc. And then if we come down to the keyboard input type info, you can select specifically for this key, for this input line, what's the key that toggles it, so enter. If you're using the enhanced input version, which Narrative CommonUI currently doesn't support, but we are working towards pushing it, then instead of selecting a key here, you'd select an input action asset. And then equally, on Gamepad, you have the Gamepad version here. So the bottom button, which it would be X on a PlayStation controller, or A on an Xbox controller. You can also come in and override the specific brushes if you want to. So you might think, what are we overriding brush-wise? And this is where CommonUI is really, really nice. So back in the project settings, in the common input settings, we've set the input data. We now have this platform input here. So on Windows or Mac, you will see your platform. I'm on Linux, so I see everything Linux can sort. And open up your version, and you'll see you've got a bunch of different things here, such as what's your default input type. So that just stops a very few frames of a flick. So if you're building it for a Nintendo Switch, for example, you're probably going to come and set this to gamepad by default. That just means when the game starts for the first time, if the user presses nothing, it will show a keyboard and mouse prompt until they wiggle a key and it will automatically flip over. So you can set the default one. You can also just outright remove specific controls if you don't want them. So you can see supports touch is automatically unticked because most people don't create a PC game and a mobile game in the same one. Unreal is kind of made towards PC consoles, so it unticks it by default. You have this default gamepad name, which we are going to come and set to generic. That's what most tutorials do, and it's what Narrative CommonUI uses. It's basically so you can differentiate different controls if you absolutely need to. But most people just set it to one common word, generic. And now the coolest thing is inside controller data, if you press add, you can see in this array, you can pick specific data for whichever platform you want to support. So I'm going to come and say I want to support PC, Xbox, PS4, and you could do Switch if you want. I'll do Switch while we're here, but I often forget that because I don't aim towards that platform. And these specific controller datas here are the main icons for all of these. So the cool thing about CommonUI, what it's done for you, or at least in Narrative CommonUI, is they've gone through every single key you would want and mapped specific icons to every single one, which isn't a difficult thing to do, it just takes a while. So you can see if I come and open up the G key, they've already added the G key in and put the icon in for G. Likewise, if I come and open up the PlayStation version, you can see for all the different controls, let's do the bottom button, you can see they've added the X icon here. So this is what it will by default use, and there's all the icons there. But on the main data table, you can of course override it if you want the interact one to show something different, for example. But that's pretty much it so far for the setup. And I know we've talked about it a while, but realistically, you come in, you go to the viewport, you select common game viewport, you come to the common input settings, and you set the input data, the generic, and the platforms, and that's it. You're kind of done. So how do we actually get started using it now we've set it all up? So the first thing you're going to need is a default baked-in HUD. Now, some users get confused with following some tutorials thinking you need a brand new HUD, and that's not true. You can use your existing one or create a new one, it's up to you. So I don't actually have one in this fresh project. So in this case, I am just going to come and create a brand new widget blueprint, default user widget, and I'll call it WB Players HUD. And I'll add a canvas panel to it just so we can see it like so. And then just to get it all set up and working, I'll just come to my player controller and I'll just make sure I create that widget. So there we go. After it's managed all the input, I'll drag off, create widget, I'll select my player's HUD, I'll promote it to a variable, and I'll call add to viewport. See, that's all normal. That's exactly how you create UI normally, right? And just to make sure it's working, I'll add something in. I'll just add a basic text saying players HUD. There we go, just so we can see it working. If I click play, you see we're all good, yeah? Players HUD is active. Now, if you remember during the drawing process, we don't call create widget when we're trying to open common UI based widgets anymore. We use something called a stack. You can come in and just select the common activatable widget stack, right? And you can put it in and you can code it yourself. But again, we're using Narrative CommonUI, which is a wrapper for it. So it's given us a bunch of helper functions. So what we can do for even easier is just come and add the narrative HUD instead. And we'll just make it full screen like so. And this box here, these texts, they're just notifications that it's got built in if you want to use them. You don't have to. But that won't be visible when I play, look. Completely normal, yeah? If I come and open this, you'll see it's exactly what we were just talking about. It's got two stacks on it there where you can push widgets to. It's also got a built-in function called open menu, which basically does exactly what you'd need to do. You'd need to get your menu stack and call push widget to it. And that's where it starts the layering process. Now, one thing I will say before we go and start creating our own UIs, there is one thing people get confused with Common UI and normal widgets. Normal widgets are not going anywhere because they are still highly used. Common UI is only for interactable UIs. If you've got an inventory or a dialog system which opens up and you need to move around it, that's an interactable UI, so you'll probably want to use Common UI. If you've just got a player's HUD, like we've just done here, you just want a standard user widget because the player's not moving around it. If you've got the old Dark Souls, Bloodborne icons at the bottom corner, here look, where you've got the little icons there, they aren't technically interactable. The user isn't navigating around them and pressing a key. They've just got a key bound and it actions it. So on this example, at the bottom, if I were to use, I don't know, K in order to access this elixir, I would press K, I would activate the elixir, and I would tell my UI to update for it. That's different to having a fully interactable UI. Whereas if we were to take a look at the inventory part, this is a fully functional UI. You're moving around it, it's blocked the gameplay. That's where Common UI shines. Just wanted to clear that up before we crack on. So now we've actually got the Common UI part here, we basically don't need this player's HUD anymore, so we can get rid of it. Because anything Common UI we're going to do will be in its own new widget. So let's create a basic widget then to start it, and we can open it up and have a look how it works. So I'm just going to come to my UI. Well, I ain't got a UI folder. I'm just going to come here, right click, user interface widget blueprint. And instead of user widget, we're going to click all classes. And if you're using your own fresh install of Common UI, not Narrative CommonUI, you're going to want the Common Activatable Widget, which is the entire Common UI base widget. If you're using Narrative CommonUI, we're going to use the Narrative menu here. And this is Common UI with everything wrapped on top of it. You can see the chain, it's definitely part of it. If you've got your own Common UI installation, you may have your own widget. They may just use the Common Activatable widget. But for Narrative menu, select that one if you're following me, otherwise use whichever one you need. And I'm going to call it NM for Narrative menu, and we will just call it Test menu, and I'll open it up. So you'll see it will look exactly the same, and that's because it is. It's basically a user widget. So we can come in, we can add a canvas panel to it, just like normal. We can add images, text, and anything else you want. And we can even position it anywhere you want. It's a normal widget in this aspect when we're just doing non-interactable things, like so, my test menu. But now when we want to come to something that's interactable, that's where we can really start to shine. So one of the things I talked about earlier is the Common Action widget here. This Common Action widget, if we just place it in somewhere like so, we can really place it anywhere we want to, is a special built-in widget where we can come and specifically say which input actions control you. So if I come into input actions here and click add, I can select a data table, so our narrative input actions list, and I can select something in all of this. So I'm just going to select interact for a test one, right? But you'll see nothing will happen. And this is a weird thing in Unreal. I'm not 100% sure why they do it, but you have to also set a design time key. And this design time key is just for this widget editor right here. So I'm just going to come in and say E key. And you can see it's set it to the E key. It's a bit stretched, so I'm just going to click size to content to make it look nice, like so. Now by default that won't do anything, it's purely for looks, but we can actually test some cool features out already. So let's actually get this menu spawning. So back on my controller, I'm just going to add a basic debug key I, right? And you can use an input action, use any way you want to spawn it, event, dialogue, collision, anything. And you can get your player's HUD, and now you'll either get your menu stack, or in anyone's case who's using Narrative CommonUI, we're going to get the Narrative HUD, right? And if you've got the standard menu stack, you'll just call push widget. If you're using Narrative UI, you will call open menu. And inside here, you'll just select an activatable widget class, test menu. And this is where CommonUI is going to shine, because it's automatically now going to redirect everything and make it work. So if I click play now, you can see I can run around like normal. If I press the I key, you see the menu has now popped up. I can't move around, I can't do anything, but I can see my E key. But check this out. If I plug in my PlayStation 5 controller, or 4, Xbox, whatever, so you can see I've now connected my controller. If I click in my game and simply press a key on my controller, watch what happens. It immediately switches over to the correct key icon. I can click with my mouse, I can switch back to the controller. Mouse, controller, mouse, controller. How cool is that? But that's only just the start of it, because there's so much more we can do to it. So let's just make sure our menu is pretty obvious. So what I'm going to do is just come and add a background blur. And I'm going to make sure it's full screen, and I'll set it to something like 10, so it's nice and blurred out look. 5. I'm going to wrap all this in an overlay. This has nothing to do with CommonUI specifically, I'm just making it work. I'll center align this, I'll full screen this, and just set it 100 offsets all around like so. There we go, I've just wrapped it in a horizontal box and put a background blur on it. And that just means that when I start it now, and press I, you see it's clearly obvious we've got a menu active, right? So one cool piece of functionality that's already built in is we come up to our menu and go to the graph here, class defaults, we've got a bunch of CommonUI stuff built in, right? So you can see Narrative has got a show cursor and focus UI, so you can untick that if you don't want the cursor active. But we've got this back functionality here built into CommonUI. So when you've got a standard widget, if you remove it from something, you call remove from parent, right? But with CommonUI, you don't call remove from parent or create widget. Create widget is replaced with open menu or push. Removing is called deactivate. So we can just right click and call deactivate widget. That's how you close the menu down. And in the class defaults, we've got one here called deactivate on back, which means when you press the back button, you can deactivate the widget and automatically close it. And equally, we want this is back handler, so you can see it there. If a back action is received, it will call the back functionality. In this case, we've told it to deactivate. We'll just tick both of those two there, come back and play the game, press I, and you see nothing changes. But if I press Shift Escape, don't press just Escape. Escape will kill the editor look. You want Shift Escape to make it work. It closes the menu automatically, and it gives me full control back. So I can press I, I've got the inventory, I do what I need. Shift Escape, it works. Exactly the same on a controller. If I press I, move to this. If I press circle, it closes the menu off, look. How cool's that? Now, there was one more option we've not talked about yet, which is this, is back action displayed in actions, in action bar. What is an action bar? So we'll just tick that and show you. And this is a very common thing built into CommonUI that people take advantage of. You can see it's showing all of the current actions available in the bottom across here. So we can see it's press escape to go back. We can also click it with the mouse. Or if we switch to controller, it's saying the B button is the back one, so we can just press B. It's thinking I'm on an Xbox controller for some reason. I'm not, so that's why it said B instead of circle. But it is still there. So you can see it's saying press B or X to go forward and back, right? But it's instantly switching to the correct key, which is one of the issues we talked about before. So let's actually make something very basically interactable in the game, right? So in our menu. So we could come in and create some basic common buttons, right? So you see, we've got a huge list of different common interactable things we can use, right? And one of them would be a button. We can come and create a basic button to do things when we click it. If you're using a narrative one, they actually have one built in for you. So you see, we've got a bunch of different ones set up, but specifically, we've got this narrative button one here. So I'll probably just come and add a horizontal box underneath this other horizontal box there. And I'll wrap it both in a vertical box so it works correctly, doesn't interfere with each other. And inside this secondary one, I'm going to add the new narrative buttons. When you add one of them, you can come and set the text on it if you want to, all fully localizable. So we can set it to slot 1. I'll add some padding to just move it down. There we go. And we can come and add slot 2, slot 3, and slot 4. Remember, I'm just showing you basic stuff for now. You can absolutely take your time, dynamically generate it and everything. These buttons are super basic. All it is a common button base, and it's added some text, a border, and the input action prompt we've already talked about, right? So we can come into each one of these, And if you wanted each one to have a separate click event, for example, if you wanted X, circle, square, triangle, you can select it and you scroll down to this common button. You've got this triggering input action. So you can come and set it to, I don't know, whichever one you want, select line A, for example, right? But another way of doing it is we can tell it to just move across these buttons dynamically. And the key way you do this is come into your graph and override the function getDesiredFocusTarget. And this is something you must set if you're using controls on your widget anyway. It just needs an initial focus target. That's it, the default one when you open the menu. So I'm just going to tell it your default button is the narrative button, the first button I've added, right? But this time you'll see if we come and play it and open the inventory, we've got our slots we can see across like that and click on, right? That's normal. But if I come back to my third person controller to really make it show, and I'm just going to say debug key, I'm just going to do debug gamepad key left shoulder and connect that to the same thing just so I can activate it in the game. And you'll see this time if we play only on the controller and I press a selection, you see it automatically selected slot 1 with A. And if I press the left key, you see it's going across all of them. How cool is that? And you can see I can select it and it all works. You will see there's this really annoying blue box around it. This is something built into Unreal. If we just go to Edit Project Settings, it's an accessibility box, but it was only really needed before. If you handle your own hovers and everything, tend to not need it. So if you search for focus and under engine user interface, you have this render focus rule. Just set it to never. And then that blue box is now going to disappear. So I can move around left shoulder. You see, I can come across and I can select whichever slot I want. How cool is that? That is really, really cool. That is all built in. And just to show you as well, even if you don't want a button part of that, we can just duplicate it and move it outside of here. So for example, if I were to just stick this in the middle, apparently, I'll set this to undo all for some reason. And if we come down to the triggering input action, select our input actions and say interact. And so this time when we play it and press the button, it's now got a completely different key. I can move across and press A to select that, but if I press square or X, it will activate the undo all function so we can plug into it. How cool is that? And then apart from that, it's all normal Unreal stuff. So if I come to the widget and say, if you click this undo all button, we'll add an on-clicked event. For now, we will just say print string all slots undone. And then from here, you can even call deactivate widget if you really want to. And then equally on these slots, I don't know, you equip armor or something. But basically, we can come in, add some print string to it, and we can say slot 1 clicked. And I'm just going to quickly shoot through and do all of these. You can, of course, also loop over it in a for loop if you're dynamically generating them. If you've hard-coded it, you could just do what I'm doing. But I'm just going to basically come in and assign all of them manually, like so. Compile, save, and run it again. And you'll see this time, come in, I can come across, and every one I click, it goes slot 2, slot 3, slot 4. If I click undo all, it says all slots undone and gives me access to the game again. How cool's that? And this is all super simply built into CommonUI. It does also work vertically. So if I was to wrap this horizontal box, so if I was to come and replace this horizontal box with a vertical box, you'll see it goes down now. It will still work the exact same way. So come in, you can move up and down instead of left and right. But this is the really cool thing I like about CommonUI. If we duplicate this entire vertical box and wrap it both in a horizontal box, you can even add some padding if you really want to. These are now two separate groups of buttons, right? But if we play it, we can move down one and simply switch to the other one just by pressing left and right, look, giving us full, absolute control of everything. How cool is that? It is super cool. Now, there are 3 other things I just want to touch on to in CommonUI that we've not fully covered yet, The other one is if you don't want your button to show at all, or say you want to perform an action that's not visible to the user, it's only down here with the other keys. Narrative CommonUI at least has something built in called register actions, right? And inside here, it lets you define extra keys. Now, there is a catch to this. If you're using the input action based CommonUI, this will work completely fine for you. We can come off, we can call register binding, and we can add a virtual key. However, if you're using the enhanced input version, as far as I'm aware, this doesn't work. You have to have a button on your form that's invisible, just like this undo all one is, but you've just set the visibility property to collapsed or something, and then you fill it in with the triggering input action. I don't know why that's the case, I couldn't find a fix for it, but if you're using the standard one, we can call register input binding, we can add a new variable for the input action, and on the callback, we can simply call create event, and we can just tell it to create a matching event book, and from here we'll say something like your random button, and then just make sure you set that input action that we created here. Hit compile, just set it to something different, something that you know is going to work, so I'll just do skip dialog line C for example. Compile and save, and now this time when you play it, you'll notice if I go to the inventory, we've got a random button at the bottom called LT. It's not got any text on it, so let's come and give it some text. So back on the register actions, we can override the display name, and we'll just put random button. You can also hide it in the action bar if you really want to. But if I press the button, you can see random button, pressing it prints out your random button. So that's not a button on the page, it's invisible or virtual, it's great for some things, right? The other aspect I want to show is the layering part, because it's very, very common when you're switching widgets to layer them on top of each other. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this entire test menu and call test menu 2 and open it up. This test menu I'll just call, make it look differently, test menu 2, get rid of that key. I'll probably shrink the overlay, I don't know, by 300 so it looks like an inner widget. I'll delete all of these, delete the under all. I don't know, basically do anything you want to it, like if you're in a settings menu or a confirmation or something. Clean up the code a little bit like so. But now what we can do is back in the test menu, let's say this undo all button, open submenu, right? And on the click event for this, instead of calling the deactivate widget like we just did, we can get the push menu. So we can call get owning HUD. I don't know if this is built into narrative or not, or if it's your CommonUI one, but you basically need to go off and get the HUD that we add called open menu on in the first place here. And then we can just from here call open menu again, even though we're inside a widget. And we can now select our test menu too. And what this is going to do is now layer them on top of each other. So you can see if I play it, I can move around this one like normal, right? If I say open submenu with the X key, it opens the submenu and hides the previous one so I can go up and down here. If I press back, it re-shows my menu. How cool is that? Now you did notice it does hide it and it transitions out. You can change the transitions on it if you come back to your menu stack. There's a transition property here, so transition type. You've got a few to pick from and curves and stuff. That's all built in. If you want it to stay there like a confirmation menu, Narrative CommonUI does have a built-in one where we can just call open prompt instead, where we do the exact same thing. We select the menu, but this time you could do more of a are you sure kind of prompt. So we press the button, open the submenu, it says, look, there's the secondary one on top of it. Press back, we go back to this one here, look. How cool is that? Now, the last thing I want to cover in CommonUI, because we're not going into deep diving everything, broad spectrum over it all, is it has a new functionality called styles that you can use. So you'll notice most of the stuff we've put into it automatically have some form of style, like the buttons and the prompts here. If you select it and scroll down, you have this style property here. It's something new Unreal has tried to add, where you can create a simple style asset and you can now customize everything in one go. So Narrative has a bunch built in, look, as you can see. But if I come up and open the button style Narrative, you see it's got basically the same normal standard Unreal widget building things built in here, but it's all in a nice style property. And likewise, I can come into the transparent, meaning if I had to edit these buttons here and over here, and I wanted to change them all, for example, to not be black anymore, we'll say they're all, like, I don't know, pinkish. Hit compile. If we come back to all the other menus, you see every single one is now updated accordingly. And likewise, we can reset it and it all updates. And this is something new built into CommonUI that a lot of people do actually really enjoy because it centralizes all your styles. You can, of course, just create a generic button, but quite often you'll see text in every single button, header, everything. You can just add one text style and reuse it across all of them. And it's just by setting the style property. You can as well change the style property in code. So you can see in the Narrative button, we set the style based on a different one if you really need to. But that's just something else built in, the styles section that you can set up. You can only apply it to CommonUI things. So you'll see if I select my normal text, I can't set the style in here. But if I come and add in a common text, I will be able to set the style and do the same thing. There, I can set the style. It doesn't mean because it's a common text it's interactable, it's just got the extra benefits of it. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen, that is CommonUI. Super basic, broad overview to it on how to set it up and get it up and running. And if you take everything we've just learned and get a CommonUI based plugin or spend some time creating something that's CommonUI based, you can see in my game, I can successfully move around my inventory without an issue at all. So come in, select the items and equip them like so, and press back to move around just like that. Come back in, I can select I can favorite the items, all using the cool little things that are all built in, look, all using CommonUI. So how cool is that, ladies and gentlemen? But there you go, that is CommonUI. A super basic starting guide that I hope if you're not using CommonUI currently and you're in Unreal 5, it will persuade you to start using it because it's really, really cool. Now, we have really only touched the basic parts of all of it. You can really go really advanced with it. But for everything I've done, creating main menus, settings pages, that's pretty much everything you need to know, essentially. But there we go. Thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Decryption, and I will see you next time.